Hi Eagles. Some of you were asking for the story about Princess Isabella, which is actually a French story called The Three Golden Apples. So this story begins in a kingdom where a king and queen lived with their daughter Isabella. Now, something happened to Isabella one day. She was not feeling very well and she was sick. And she kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker until she was so sick that she ended up in bed. Now, the king and queen, of course, loved their daughter so much that they were so worried about her because she wasn't getting better. And, they said, well, what are we going to do? And they worried and worried and worried. Well, one day, to their surprise, an old man came to the castle, and he spoke to the king and the queen together. There is something that can cure Princess Isabella, he said to them. What is it? Said the king. Yes, tell us, said the queen. We'll do anything for her to get better. And he said, well, in a far off part of the kingdom, there's a tree, a very special tree that grows golden apples. If you can get those golden apples, and if Isabella eats them, she'll regain her health. And the king and queen were so happy to have this bit of hope. They said, thank you so, so much. The old mysterious man left. And the king and queen together made a plan. They decided they had to make an announcement to everybody in the kingdom, as far as they could reach, that to find this special tree with the golden apples. And so they sent their messenger out to announce this. Now, it turns out that a poor peasant that lived in a far off place did actually have a tree with golden apples. Or he didn't know they were special apples. He thought it was just a regular apple tree. But when he heard this announcement, he thought, oh, those must be the golden apples. Now, this poor peasant also had 3 sons. And they also heard this news. Did you hear the announcement from the king? Whoever can cure Princess Isabella with the 3 apples will get to inherit the kingdom and move in. Well, of course, they wanted to do this because they barely had anything. They didn't have any money, barely had enough food. They just had a garden, and they had some hens. This is a goose, but you can pretend it's a hen. And they had one pig. They just didn't have very much. They had a little tiny house. The house was just so small, do you remember? And so, of course, they wanted to make this plan. And the oldest one said, I'm going to go. I'm the oldest. I should get to go first. So he went over to this tree that was in his yard. He took off the 3 top apples. He put them in a basket and he covered it with a cloth. And he started off to go to the castle. Now, he didn't make it very far. If you remember, he ran into a woman in the forest. She was a little strange. What's in your basket, my lad? Oh, he didn't want to tell her the truth. Oh, just 3 slimy toads. And then she said something strange. Then 3 slimy toads they will be, she said. And she disappeared. The oldest son kept walking until he got to the palace gates and knocked on the door, and the herald answered and said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "I have the golden apples for Princess Isabella." And he let him in, and he brought them up to the king. And the king said, "What do you have, my lad?" And he said, "I have the 3 golden apples." And the king was so hopeful. And he took the basket, opened it up, and what jumped out but 3 slimy frogs. Ah! The king gave this lad a slap that sent him tumbling down the steps of the palace gates and stairs, and the king went back upstairs to his study. Now, the oldest brother came back and he told his other brothers what had happened. And the next oldest brother said, "Well, it's my turn. I'm gonna try my hand at this." And he went over to the tree and he picked 3 more apples. He put them in the basket, covered it with a cloth, and he started off through the forest on his way and his long journey to the castle. And on his way, not long after he started, he ran into that same strange woman in the forest. "What do you have there in your basket?" she said. "Oh, just some slithery snakes," he replied. And she said back to him, "Then slithery snakes they will be." And she walked off, and he didn't think anything of it, and he kept walking and walking until he got to the castle, and he knocked on the door, and he said to the herald, "I'd like to see the king. I have the 3 golden apples." And the herald let him inside. He went to the king and to the queen and said, "I have them, I have them." And the king took the cloth off the basket, and out came those slithery snakes. Oh, this time the king was even angrier, and he slapped him twice. He fell rolling down the steps and went back home, disappointed by the whole thing. And he told his brothers what had happened. They were just going to give up, but not the youngest brother. The youngest brother, named Martin, said, "I'm going to do it. I want to have a chance." And they just kind of laughed at him. "Okay, Martin, you go ahead and try." So Martin went over to the tree. He took the last apples off the tree, and he started his journey. Now, Martin was a really kind, honest boy. And when somebody asked him a question, he always told the truth. And not too long after he started off, he ran into that old woman in the forest. And she said, "What do you have there, my lad?" 3 golden apples, Martin said. He told her the truth. "Why do you have 3 golden apples?" And Martin said, "Well, I've heard the princess is sick, and it's said that these will make her better." And the woman looked at Martin and said, "Well, 3 golden apples they will be." This is good, right? Martin kept on going until he got to the castle. He knocked on the door, and the herald answered, and he let him in to see the king and the queen. "I have the golden apples." And now the king and queen are a little suspicious because they've been disappointed 2 times. But he reaches in gingerly, and he lifts up the cloth, and he sees indeed there are 3 apples there. "You do have them." And he brings Martin with the apples right up to see Princess Isabella, who was still in bed. Here she is in bed. "Isabella, we have the apples. Can you try just a bite, just a bite?" And he reaches out with the apple, and she leans up a little bit, and she takes just the smallest bite. But with that bite, she gives a sigh. And she starts to sit up a little bit more. And he feeds her a little bit more of the apple. And soon she's able to stand up. And she smiles for the first time in a year. She's feeling better. And the king and the queen, they're so happy to see this. They're so happy. But it didn't last long, because the king remembered what he had promised. And he looked at Martin, and he realized he was the son of a peasant. Well, you can't have move into the kingdom just yet, he said to Martin. First, you have to really prove yourself. I need you to watch my hares tomorrow in the field. Now, if you remember, a hare is a rabbit, and the king has 100 of them. Oh, I forgot to tell you that when Martin was in the forest, when he ran into the old woman, do you remember that she gave him something? She gave him a whistle. After she said 3 golden apples would be, she gave him a whistle, and she said, this might be useful. So I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you that. So when Martin was told the king, yes, okay, I'll watch the hares. He was out and wondering how would he ever watch 100 hares and keep track of them, because rabbits hop off and they're so fast. And so they did indeed hop off, and 100, they scattered in all directions. But then he remembered the whistle the old woman gave him, and he reached into his pocket and he decided to give it a little blow. And when he blew the whistle, something magical happened. All the hares came running back. And so at the end of the day, when he came back to see the king and he had all 100 hares with him, the king couldn't believe it. And so the king said, well, you have to watch them for another day. The king was a little worried about this, because he didn't want to give the kingdom to a peasant's son. So he came up with a plan. The king dressed up the queen as a poor peasant in disguise. And when the queen came into the fields where Martin was watching the hares, most people wouldn't have recognized her. But Martin did. Martin knew it was really the queen. And the queen said, oh, I'd like to buy one of your hares. And Martin said, well, they're not for sale. And the queen said, oh, well, I'll pay any price. And so Martin said, well, I'll only sell them if you give me 3 kisses on my cheek. And the queen thought to herself, who was dressed up as a peasant, oh, that's so beneath me to kiss a peasant, but I really want one of those hares. And so she did. She gave Martin 3 kisses. He gave her one of the hares, and off she went. But guess what happened? At the end of the day, when Martin blew the whistle, the hare wriggled out from the queen and appeared right by Martin. And when he saw the king at the end of the day, and the king counted all 100 hares, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, he realized they were indeed all there. He had to come up with another plan, he thought. All right, you have to watch them for one more day. And this time, on that next day, the king dressed up as a peasant and rode into the meadows where Martin was watching the hares, and he pretended that he wanted to buy them. I'd like to buy one of those hares, the king dressed up as a peasant said. And Martin said, of course, they're not for sale. And he said, well, I'll do anything to get one of the hares. And Martin, who had cut a branch from a tree, said, I'll only give you a hare if you let me whack you 3 times with this branch. Well, that is so beneath the king to be whacked by a branch by a poor peasant's son, but he agreed because he didn't want him to inherit the kingdom, so he got off his horse. Martin took the branch and whacked him 3 times with the branch. The king, disguised as a peasant, grabbed the hare, rode back to his castle. But when Martin blew the whistle later on, guess who came back? The hare wriggled out of the king's hands and appeared right next to Martin. Martin returned to the kingdom with all 100 hares. Oh, the king was so upset. He said, well, you cannot have the kingdom until you can fill a bag with truths and show me all your wit and wisdom. And Martin was not afraid of this one because he knew he had some truths he could say that would really embarrass the king and the queen. And he said, well, I was out watching the hares one day when the queen came by and asked me for 3 kisses. And the king didn't want to hear this. Stop telling the story. But Martin kept going. He said, and then I was in there, and then the king came dressed up, and he started to, and he said, no, don't tell the story. And the king stopped Martin from telling all these truths because he was so embarrassed that, what people would find out. He said, here are the kings to the kingdom. You can have them. And Martin lived happily ever after in the kingdom. And that's the end.